Welcome to the family. If you enjoy powerful stories and wild adventures, subscribe now, hit like and share with someone who will love it too. The command deck of the Galactic Unity hummed with tension as Ambassador Elena Voss stormed across the polished metal floor, her diplomatic robes billowing behind her. Her violet eyes blazed with fury as she approached the lone figure standing at the observation deck, hands clasped behind his back as he gazed out at the swirling nebula beyond. "How dare you?" she hissed, her voice cutting through the ambient noise of the ship's systems. Captain Jack Stone didn't turn around. His broad shoulders remained rigid beneath his pristine blue uniform, the fabric stretched taut across his muscular frame. "Ambassador," he acknowledged quietly, his voice carrying that familiar gravelly tone that had once made her heart skip. "Don't." "You ambassador me," Eleanor spat, circling to face him. Her pale blue skin flushed deeper with anger, the bioluminescent patterns along her temples pulsing erratically. "You had no right to override my negotiations with the Corvan Empire. Do you have any idea what you've done?" Jack finally met her gaze, his steel-grey eyes impassive. "I prevented a massacre." "You prevented peace." Eleanor's voice rose, drawing. Glances from the bridge crew. 3 cycles of delicate diplomacy, Jack. 3 cycles of building trust, of showing them that humanity could be reasonable, that we weren't the monsters they believed us to be. And you destroyed it all in one afternoon. The human captain's jaw tightened. The Corvans were stalling. Their fleet movements were defensive. They were scared, Jack. Scared of us, of what humans are capable of. Eleanor stepped closer, her small frame dwarfed by his towering presence. "They've heard the stories. Every species in this sector has heard the stories." A muscle in Jack's cheek twitched. Around them, the bridge crew pretended to focus on their stations, but Elena could feel their attention like a weight. Representatives from a dozen different species, all part of the Galactic Council's integration initiative, all watching the confrontation between the human captain and the Altarian ambassador. "The stories are exaggerated," Jack said finally. "Are they?" Elena's voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. "Tell that to the ruins of Kepler Station. Tell that to the survivors of the Centauri Rebellion. Tell that to the—" "Enough." Jack's voice carried a warning that would have silenced most beings in the galaxy, but Elena wasn't most beings. She was the daughter of Altair Prime's most respected diplomatic family, trained from birth in the art of negotiation and compromise. She had spent her entire adult life working to bridge the gap between humanity and the rest of the galaxy, to prove that coexistence was possible, and this man, this infuriating, stubborn, impossibly attractive man, kept undermining everything she worked for. "No, not enough," she said, her hands trembling with rage. "You sit there in your pristine uniform, playing the noble captain, but underneath you're just like all the rest. Just another human warrior who thinks violence is the answer to everything." Jack's eyes flashed dangerously. "You don't know what you're talking about." "Don't I?" Eleanor reached forward, her slender fingers grasping the front of his uniform jacket. "You want to know what I see when I look at you, Captain Stone. I see everything that's wrong with your species. I see the reason why half the galaxy still votes to quarantine Earth despite decades of so-called integration." The fabric of his uniform was surprisingly soft beneath her fingers, but her anger made her grip strong. "You're a relic, Jack, a throwback to humanity's violent past, and you're too proud to admit it." Something shifted in Jack's expression, a flash of pain so brief she almost missed it. "Let go of my uniform, Ambassador." His voice was quiet, almost gentle, but there was steel beneath it. Eleanor felt a moment of uncertainty, but her anger was too strong, her frustration too deep. "Make me," she challenged. And then she pulled hard and sudden, the diplomatic training that had taught her to read body language, also giving her the leverage to tear at the carefully maintained facade of his uniform. The sound of ripping fabric filled the bridge like a gunshot. Time seemed to slow as the torn pieces of Jack's uniform jacket fell away, revealing what lay beneath. Elena's angry words died in her throat, her violet eyes widening in shock as she stared at his exposed torso. Scars. Dozens of them, crisscrossing his chest and arms like a map of violence written in flesh and pain. But these weren't the clean, precise marks of surgical procedures or even the rough tears of battle wounds. These were something else entirely, deliberate, methodical, and unmistakably alien in origin. Elena's hands flew to her mouth, her anger evaporating like mist before the sun. Around them, the bridge had fallen completely silent. Even the ambient hum of the ship's systems seemed muted as everyone stared at the revelation before them. "My God," whispered Dr. Marcus Webb, the human medical officer, his face pale with a recognition. "Jack, you never said—" "Because it wasn't relevant," Jack interrupted, his voice steady despite the exposure. He made no move to cover himself, standing straight and proud even as Elena's shocked gaze traced the network of scars. That covered his body. But Elena wasn't looking at the scars anymore. Her trained diplomatic eye had caught something else. Small, almost invisible marks at regular intervals along his spine and ribs. Injection sites. Hundreds of them, old and faded but unmistakably present. "These aren't battle scars," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Jack's grey eyes met hers, and for the first time since she'd known him, she saw vulnerability there. "No, they're not." Commander Lisa Torres, the ship's Martian-born security chief, stepped forward, her dark eyes filled with understanding. "You were captured during the Outer Rim campaign, weren't you? The mission report said you were KIA. The mission reports were wrong." Jack's voice carried no emotion, but Elena had spent years learning to read the subtle signs of trauma in diplomacy's casualties. She could see the carefully controlled tension in his shoulders, the slight tremor in his hands that he was fighting to suppress. "The Viridian Research Collective," Dr. Webb said suddenly, pieces clicking into place. "The reports of human experimentation that came out during the war crimes tribunals. But those were classified. They captured me after the Battle of Titans. Ring," Jack said quietly. "Held me for 14 months while they tried to figure out what made humans so effective in combat." Elena felt sick. The Viridian Research Collective had been one of the galaxy's most respected scientific institutions. Before the war, their medical advances helping dozens of species overcome genetic diseases and disabilities. But when humanity had emerged as a military force that could challenge the established galactic order, the collective had taken a darker turn. They wanted to know why humans could keep fighting when other species would surrender, Jack continued, his voice flat and clinical. Why we could function under stress levels that would kill most sentient beings. Why we formed such strong pack bonds with other species despite being evolutionary newcomers. Elena's knees felt weak. She had heard whispers in diplomatic circles about experiments conducted on human prisoners during the integration wars, but the rumors had been dismissed as propaganda, stories told to justify humanity's increasingly aggressive expansion. Intergalactic politics. "So they cut you open," she whispered, over and over again. Jack's smile was humorless. "Took samples, ran tests, injected me with various compounds to see how my body would react. They were particularly interested in human pain tolerance and psychological resilience." Around them, the bridge crew stood in stunned silence. Elena could see the horror on their faces, species that had grown up hearing stories of human brutality, now confronted with evidence of brutality inflicted upon humans. "But you escaped," Commander Torres said. "I was rescued." Jack's eyes found Elena's again. "By a joint task force that included Altarian diplomatic vessels. Your people were the ones who demanded access to Viridian research facilities after the first rumors surfaced. They're the reason I'm alive." Elena felt the world tilt around her. Her people, her own diplomatic corps, had been instrumental in exposing the collective's crimes. And yet, she had never known, never been told that. The survivors included this man she had spent months condemning as a warmonger. "The Corvan Empire," she said suddenly, understanding flooding through her. "They were allied with the collective during the war. That's why you couldn't let me negotiate with them. That's why—" The Corvan Third Fleet included ships that participated in prisoner transfers, Jack confirmed. Their current ambassador was the intelligence officer who interrogated human captives. His voice remained steady, but Elena could see the cost of maintaining that control in the tight lines around his eyes. "You should have told me," she whispered. "Why?" Jack asked simply. "So you could pity me. So you could treat me like a victim, instead of a captain." The galaxy already sees humans as dangerous animals, Ambassador. The last thing we need is for them to see us as broken ones too. Elena stared at him, seeing him truly for the first time. Not the arrogant human captain she had painted him as, but a survivor carrying scars both visible and hidden, doing his best to serve a species that was still fighting for acceptance among the stars, and she had just publicly humiliated him in front of representatives from every major power in the sector. The silence on the bridge stretched like a taut cable, ready to snap. Elena stood frozen, her hands still trembling from the adrenaline of her anger, now transformed into something far more complex. The torn pieces of Jack's uniform lay scattered, at their feet like accusations. "Captain," Dr. Webb stepped forward, his medical training overriding protocol, "you should let me examine—" "No!" Jack's voice cut through the air with quiet authority. "I'm fine, Doctor." But Elena could see he wasn't fine, none of them were. The carefully maintained balance of the integration mission had just shifted dramatically, and she was responsible. "Bridge crew, resume your duties," Jack ordered, his command presence reasserting itself despite his state of undress. "Navigation, maintain our current heading toward the Kepler station." The crew reluctantly returned to their stations, though Elena could feel their continued attention like heat from a star. She watched as Jack moved toward his captain's chair, noting for the first time the slight hitch in his gait that she had always attributed to military bearing. Now she wondered what other injuries lay hidden beneath his stoic exterior. "Ambassador." "Thos," Jack said formally, settling into his chair as if nothing had happened. "I believe you had concerns about our diplomatic approach to the Corvin situation." Elena blinked, caught off guard by his apparent composure. "Jack, Captain Stone," he corrected, his grey eyes meeting hers with professional distance. "And I would appreciate it if you could forward your recommendations through proper channels." The dismissal stung worse than any anger would have. Elena felt the weight of every gaze on the bridge, representatives from species that had always viewed human-Altarian cooperation as the backbone of peaceful integration. She had just shattered that perception in the most public way possible. "Of course, Captain," she managed, her diplomatic training finally reasserting itself. "I'll prepare a full report." She turned to leave, but Commander Torres intercepted her path. The Martian woman's expression was carefully neutral, but Elena could read the judgment in her dark eyes. "Ambassador," Torres said quietly, "a word." Elena followed the security chief to an alcove near the bridge's secondary stations, away from the direct attention of the crew, but still visible to anyone who cared to look. "You had no right," Torres said bluntly. "I know," Elena whispered, her earlier fury replaced by shame. "Do you?" Torres's voice carried the edge of someone who had seen too much. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you just took a man who survived 14 months of torture and humiliated him in front of every species representative on this ship." Elena flinched. "I didn't know." "That's the point. You didn't." "No, but you assumed. You saw a human in a position of authority and immediately labeled him as everything wrong with our species." Torres stepped closer, her voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "Do you have any idea what he went through to get here? What any of us went through?" The question hung in the air between them. Elena realized with growing horror that she had spent months aboard this ship, working alongside its crew, without ever really trying to understand their individual stories. She had seen them as representatives of humanity's military might, not as people with their own experiences and trauma. The Viridian experiments weren't just about physical torture, Torres continued. They were about breaking human psychological bonds. They would capture prisoners in groups and force them to watch each other suffer. They wanted to understand how humans formed loyalty, how we built trust. Eleanor's breath caught in her throat. Jack held out for 14 months. Never broke. Never gave them what they wanted. When we finally reached that facility, he was protecting 2 other prisoners, a communications officer who had lost her legs and a pilot who was barely conscious from the neural experiments. Torres's eyes were hard as steel. He could have. Hal escaped months earlier, could have saved himself, but he wouldn't leave them behind. The bridge seemed to spin around Eleanor. Everything she thought she knew about Jack Stone, about humanity's role in galactic politics, was crumbling like sand. "And now," Torres said with quiet finality, "you've exposed all of that in front of species representatives who are already looking for reasons to restrict human involvement in galactic affairs. Well done, Ambassador. Really excellent diplomacy." Elena wanted to protest, to defend herself, but the words wouldn't come, because Torres was right. In her anger, in her frustration with what she saw as human arrogance, she had potentially damaged everything she had spent her career trying to build. Across the bridge, Jack was quietly reviewing reports as if nothing had happened. But Elena could see the careful way he held himself, the slight tension in his shoulders that spoke of someone accustomed to hiding pain. How many times had she misinterpreted his restraint as arrogance? How many times had she confused his professionalism with coldness? "What do I do?" she asked Torres, her voice barely audible. The security chief studied her for a long moment. "That depends, Ambassador. Are you asking as a diplomat trying to salvage a political situation, or as a person who just realized she hurt someone who didn't deserve it?" Elena closed her eyes, feeling the weight of the question. When she opened them again, her decision was clear. "Both," she said. Elena spent the next 3 hours in her quarters, staring at her diplomatic files and seeing them with new eyes. Every report, every briefing, every carefully crafted analysis of human behavior in the post-integration galaxy suddenly felt hollow and incomplete. She had built her career on understanding the complex web of species relationships that held the galactic community together. She prided herself on seeing past surface appearances to the deeper motivations that drove interspecies politics. Yet she had looked at Jack Stone every day for 6 months and seen only what she expected to see. Her personal communicator chimed softly, a message from her father on Altair Prime, responding to her latest diplomatic report. His words were warm with approval, praising her efforts to moderate what he called humanity's aggressive tendencies in the integration process. Elena deleted the message without finishing it. A soft knock at her door interrupted her brooding. "Come in," she called, expecting one of her aides. Instead, Dr. Webb entered, carrying a medical kit and wearing an expression of professional concern, mixed with something that looked like disappointment. "Ambassador," he said formally, "I wanted to discuss Captain Stone's medical situation." Elena felt heat rise in her cheeks. "Doctor, I appreciate your concern, but I don't think you exposed classified medical information in a public setting," Webb interrupted, his usual gentle demeanor replaced by clinical directness. "As the ship's chief medical officer, I need to understand the potential ramifications." The words hit Elena like a physical blow. In her anger, she hadn't just humiliated Jack personally, she had potentially violated medical privacy laws that governed military personnel. "I didn't mean," she began. "Intent is irrelevant, Ambassador." Webb set his medical kit on her desk with more force than necessary. "The captain's medical history is classified at the highest levels for good reason. His survival of the Viridian experiments makes him a valuable intelligence asset, and his psychological profile is considered crucial to understanding human resilience in extreme situations." Elena sank into her chair, the full weight of her actions beginning to settle on her shoulders. "Moreover," Webb continued, "there are 17 species representatives on this ship who now have detailed visual evidence of experimental procedures that were supposedly confined to classified reports. Do you understand what that means for ongoing war crimes investigations?" She hadn't thought about that either. The Viridian Research Collective trials were still ongoing, with several high-ranking officials claiming that reports of experimentation had been exaggerated for political purposes. Jack's scars were physical evidence that could impact proceedings involving billions of lives across dozens of star systems. "Doctor," she said quietly, "is there anything I can do to minimize the damage?" Webb's laugh was bitter. "Perhaps. But first you need to understand exactly what you've done." He activated his medical scanner, displaying a holographic projection above her desk. Elena gasped as she recognized the familiar pattern of scars she had seen on Jack's chest, but now they were overlaid with medical annotations and timestamps. "These marks here," Webb pointed to a cluster of scars near Jack's left shoulder, "are from neural interface experiments. The Viridians were trying to understand how human neural pathways differ from other species. They inserted probes directly into his nervous system while he was conscious. Eleanor felt bile rise in her throat. These along his ribs are from organ function studies. They wanted to understand human cardiovascular efficiency under stress, so they would induce controlled cardiac episodes while monitoring his vital signs. Webb's voice remained clinical, but Elena could hear the anger beneath it. And these, he highlighted a series of thin lines across Jack's abdomen, are from psychological conditioning experiments. They would inflict pain while showing him images of human civilian populations, trying to condition him to associate protection of humans with his own suffering. "Stop," Eleanor whispered, but Webb continued. "It didn't work, of course. If anything, it strengthened his protective instincts. That's what they never understood about humans, Ambassador. We don't break the way other species do. We adapt, we endure. And sometimes we become stronger in the broken places." Eleanor was openly weeping now, her diplomatic composure completely shattered. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you need to understand what you saw when you tore his uniform," Webb said, his voice gentling slightly. "Those aren't just scars, Ambassador. They're proof of something the galaxy has been trying to understand about humanity since first contact. They're evidence of our capacity for sacrifice, for endurance, for choosing to protect others, even when it costs us everything." He deactivated the scanner, the holographic display fading away. "And now, thanks to your public revelation, that evidence is no longer under our control." Elena buried her face in her hands, the weight of her actions crushing down on her like gravity from a heavy world. She had spent her entire career working to build bridges between species, and in one moment of anger, she might have damaged relationships that had taken decades to establish. "What do I do?" she asked again. The question that seemed to have no answer. Webb studied her for a long moment, then surprised her by sitting down across from her desk. "You could start by talking to him," he said. "Really talking, not as an ambassador to a captain, but as one person to another." "He won't want to see me." "Probably not," Webb agreed. "But Jack Stone has never done what was easy, Ambassador. And right now the hardest thing for him isn't dealing with his own exposure. It's worrying about what your actions might mean for human integration efforts." Elena looked up, surprised. "He's worried about me?" "He's worried about all of us." Webb corrected. "That's who he is. That's who he's always been, even when it nearly destroyed him." The doctor stood to leave, then paused at the door. "Ambassador, there's something else you should know. The reason Jack never told you about his capture wasn't pride or secrecy. It was because he knew how you'd react, how anyone would react. He didn't want to be seen as a victim or a symbol. He just wanted to do his job and serve his crew." After Webb left, Eleanor sat alone in her quarters, staring at the stars beyond her viewport and trying to find the courage to face what she had done. Eleanor found Jack in the ship's observation deck at 0300 hours during the night cycle when the corridors were dimmed and most of the crew was asleep. He stood at the massive viewport silhouetted against the swirling colors of the Andromeda Nebula, wearing a fresh uniform that couldn't quite hide the knowledge of what lay beneath. She had rehearsed this conversation a dozen times, crafting diplomatic phrases and careful apologies. But seeing him there, alone with the weight of command and the burden of his secrets, all her prepared words crumbled away. "I was wrong," she said simply. Jack didn't turn around, but she saw his shoulders shift slightly. "About which part?" "All of it." Elena stepped closer, close enough to see his reflection in the transparent aluminum of the viewport. His face was carefully neutral, but she had learned to read the subtle signs of strain around his eyes. "I was wrong about you. Wrong about humanity's role in the integration. Wrong about almost everything I thought I understood." Understanding comes with experience, Ambassador. You can't blame yourself for not knowing classified information. His diplomatic tone stung worse than anger would have. She realized he was protecting her even now, giving her an easy excuse to minimize her actions. "Stop," she said. "Stop what? Stop making it easy for me. Stop being understanding and professional and kind." Elena's voice broke slightly. "I humiliated you in front of the entire bridge crew. I exposed information that could damage ongoing legal proceedings. I potentially compromised your medical privacy and your crew's safety. The least you could do is be angry with me." Finally, Jack turned around. In the dim lighting of the observation deck, his grey eyes seemed almost silver. "Would that help you feel better, Ambassador, if I shouted at you? If I told you how much it hurt to have my trauma exposed to representatives from species who are already looking for reasons to fear us?" Elena flinched but forced herself to meet his gaze. "Yes, it would, because then at least you'd be treating me like I deserve." "And how do you deserve to be treated?" The question hung in the air between them. Elena realized she had expected Jack to handle her guilt the way he seemed to handle everything else, by absorbing it, managing it, making it easier for everyone around him to function. "Like someone who made a terrible mistake," she said finally. "Like someone who let her prejudices blind her to the truth. Like someone who might have damaged something important because she was too proud to admit she might be wrong." Jack studied her for a long moment, then moved to one of the observation deck's seating areas. "Sit," he said. "Not an order, but a request." Elena sat across from him, noting how he positioned himself so that the viewport's light illuminated her face, while leaving his own partially in shadow. Even now he was reading her, assessing her emotional state with the same tactical awareness he brought to everything else. "Do you know why I took this assignment?" Jack asked. Elena shook her head. "Because I believed in integration, not the political process that's messy and complicated and full of compromise, but the idea that different species could work together, could learn from each other, could become something better than they were alone." Jack's voice was quiet, reflective. "The Viridians nearly broke that belief in me. But they didn't." "No, they didn't. You want to know why?" Jack leaned forward slightly, his eyes intense. "Because while they were cutting me open, trying to understand what made humans tick, I was learning about them, about how fear makes people do terrible things, about how easy it is to dehumanize or de-alienize someone when you convince yourself they're a threat." Eleanor felt a chill of understanding. "The Viridians weren't monsters, Ambassador. They were scientists who let fear override their ethics. They saw human military effectiveness and convinced themselves that we were inherently violent, inherently dangerous. So they justified doing things to us that they would never do to species they considered civilized." "Like what I did to you," Eleanor whispered. "Like what you did to me," Jack agreed, but his voice held no condemnation. "You saw a human in a position of military authority and convinced yourself I was everything wrong with my species. You didn't see me as an individual. You saw me as a representative of human aggression that needed to be controlled." Eleanor felt tears threatening again, but forced herself to maintain eye contact. "How do I fix this?" "You don't," Jack said simply. "Some things can't be fixed, Ambassador. They can only be learned from." The honesty of his answer was devastating. Eleanor had built her career on finding solutions, on negotiating outcomes that left everyone satisfied. The idea that her actions might have consequences beyond her ability to repair was almost unbearable. "But," Jack continued, "you can decide what kind of person you want to be going forward. You can choose whether this moment defines you or teaches you. What would you choose?" Jack was quiet for a long time, his gaze returning to the nebula beyond the viewport. When he spoke again, his voice carried the weight of someone who had made difficult choices and lived with their consequences. "I would choose to remember that every species, every individual carries invisible scars. I would choose to look deeper before making judgments, and I would choose to believe that understanding is possible, even when it's difficult." Eleanor nodded, feeling something shift inside her chest. The anger and defensiveness that had driven her for months was dissolving, replaced by something more complex but also more honest. "Jack," she said, using his name deliberately, "will you help me understand, not just about humans, but about all of it? About what integration really means, beyond the diplomatic protocols?" For the first time since she had torn his uniform, Jack Stone smiled. It was a small smile, careful and guarded, but it was real. "I'd be honored to, Elena." The use of her first name felt like absolution and challenge combined. Elena realized that this conversation wasn't ending anything. It was beginning something new. Over the following weeks, Elena found herself seeing the galactic unity with completely different eyes. Where once she had observed the ship's operations with the detached analysis of a diplomatic professional, she now noticed the intricate web of relationships that held the crew together. She watched Commander Torres work with the Centaurian engineering team, noting how the Martian woman's direct communication style complemented the alien's preference for precise technical specifications. She observed Dr. Webb collaborating with the ship's Altarian medical staff, his Earth-trained instincts combining with their advanced biotechnology to create treatment protocols neither could achieve alone. But most importantly, she watched Jack. Stone Command. What she had once interpreted as authoritarian human aggression, she now recognized as something far more subtle. Jack didn't rule his crew, he orchestrated them. Every order was calibrated to the individual receiving it, every decision weighed not just for tactical effectiveness, but for psychological impact on species whose stress responses varied dramatically from human norms. The Corvan delegation is requesting another meeting, reported Lieutenant Alex Kim, the ship's human communications officer, as they approached the disputed Kepler station. Elena felt Jack's slight hesitation before he responded, and she finally understood it wasn't arrogance, it was calculation. He was considering not just the tactical implications of the meeting, but how his presence might affect the Corvan representative's psychological state. Ambassador Voss, Jack said formally, what's your assessment of Corvan cultural protocols regarding leadership hierarchies? It was the first time he had directly requested her professional opinion since the incident on the bridge. Elena felt the weight of the crew's attention and realized this was a test, not of her diplomatic skills, but of whether she could set aside her preconceptions and work as part of the team. Traditional Corvan society operates on a consensus-based authority structure, she replied, shifting into her professional mode. Direct confrontation with leadership figures is considered a challenge to group stability. However, their recent integration with galactic political structures has created tension between traditional approaches and what they perceive as human-style individual authority. Jack nodded thoughtfully. Recommendations? I should take point. On the initial contact, Elena said, Altarian diplomatic protocols are seen as more traditionally aligned with Corvan values. Once trust is established, we can gradually introduce the human command perspective. Agreed. Commander Torres, adjust our approach vector to signal non-aggressive intent. Dr. Webb, prepare medical assistance protocols in case the station's inhabitants need humanitarian aid. Elena watched the orders flow through the crew with new appreciation. Each command was designed to send specific signals to the Corvan observers who would be monitoring their approach. Jack wasn't just moving a ship, he was conducting a complex diplomatic ballet that most ambassadors would never recognize. Captain, she said quietly, may I suggest including Ensign Mora in the diplomatic party? Jack raised an eyebrow. Ensign Mora was a young Centaurian whose species had historical conflicts with the Corvans, but Elena had noticed something during their previous meetings. The Centaurian emotional resonance patterns are similar to pre-integration Corvan psychology, Elena explained. Mora's presence might help bridge the psychological gap between their traditional values and their current political reality. A small smile played at the corner of Jack's mouth. Excellent observation, Ambassador. Make it so. As the crew prepared for the diplomatic contact, Elena found herself working alongside Jack in a way she had never imagined possible. Their previous antagonism had been replaced by something more complex, a professional respect built on mutual understanding of each other's strengths and limitations. Ambassador, Jack said as they reviewed the final approach protocols, there's something you should know about the Corvan situation. Elena looked up from her diplomatic files, noting the careful tone in his voice. 3 of the Corvan representatives were present during my interrogation at the Viridian facility, Jack said quietly. They weren't directly involved in the experiments, but they observed and reported on human psychological responses. Elena felt her stomach drop. Jack, If you can't handle this assignment, I can handle it, he interrupted, but not harshly. But I wanted you to understand that this negotiation isn't just about territorial disputes or trade agreements. For the Corvins, it's about confronting their own complicity in war crimes. For me, it's about proving that understanding is possible, even with people who participated in your torture. The weight of what he was saying hit Eleanor like a physical blow. Jack wasn't just commanding this mission, he was using his own trauma as a diplomatic tool, demonstrating human capacity for forgiveness and cooperation, even with former enemies. How do you do it? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. The same way you're doing it right now, Jack replied, by choosing to see people as individuals rather than representatives of their worst actions, by believing that everyone is capable of growth, even when they've given you reasons to doubt it. Elena realized he was talking about more than just the Corvins. He was talking about her, about the possibility of moving beyond the prejudices and assumptions that had defined their relationship. The diplomatic party will consist of Ambassador Voss, myself, Ensign Mora, and Dr. Webb, Jack announced to the bridge crew. We'll approach under standard diplomatic protocols with full transparency about our mission and intentions. As they prepared to transport to Kepler Station, Elena caught Jack's eye. Thank you, she said simply. For what? For showing me what leadership actually looks like. Jack's smile was warm and genuine. Thank you for showing me what diplomacy actually looks like. Elena realized that somewhere in their conflict and resolution, they had become something neither of them had expected. True partners in the complex work of building understanding between species who had every reason to mistrust each other. Kepler Station hung in space like a wounded giant, its hull scarred by weapons fire from the recent border skirmish between human and Corvin patrol fleets. As the diplomatic shuttle approached the docking bay, Elena could see the evidence of both species' destructive capabilities and their shared vulnerability. The Corvin delegation was waiting in the station's main conference room, their reptilian features rigid with the formal dignity their species used to mask uncertainty. Elena recognized the body language immediately. These were beings caught between their traditional values and the political realities of galactic integration. Ambassador Voss, the lead Corvin delegate, inclined his head slightly. We appreciate your presence in these difficult circumstances. Elena returned the gesture with precise cultural accuracy. Minister Thak, the Galactic Council values the Corvin Empire's commitment to peaceful resolution. But even as she spoke the diplomatic pleasantries, Eleanor was watching the subtle interplay between the delegates. Two of them kept glancing toward Jack with what she had learned to recognize as carefully controlled recognition. These were the ones who had observed his interrogation. Captain Stone, Minister Thak addressed Jack directly, his voice carrying undertones that only someone familiar with Corvin emotional expression would catch. Your presence here is unexpected. Eleanor held her breath, waiting to see how Jack would respond. This was the moment where everything they had built over the past weeks would be tested. Minister, Jack replied with calm professionalism. Unexpected. Situations often provide the best opportunities for understanding. The Corvin delegate, who had been avoiding eye contact, suddenly looked up, his scaled features showing surprise. Eleanor realized that Jack's response had been crafted specifically for Corvin psychological patterns, acknowledging the difficult history while refusing to let it define the current interaction. Indeed, Minister Thak said slowly, perhaps we should discuss the territorial dispute that brought us here. Before we do, Jack said, surprising everyone, including Elena, I think we should acknowledge the complexity of our shared history. The tension in the room ratcheted up several degrees. Elena saw Dr. Webb's hand move slightly toward his medical scanner, while Ensign Mora's Centaurian empathic abilities were clearly picking up the emotional undercurrents. Captain, Elena started to intervene, but Jack held up a gentle hand. Minister Thak, 3 of your colleagues were present during my detention at the Viridian Research Facility. I want them to know that I hold no personal animosity toward them for their observations of the experiments conducted there. The silence that followed was absolute. Elena could hear the station's life support systems humming in the background, the only sound in a room where multiple species were processing the implications of Jack's statement. one of the younger Corvan. Delegates, his scales showing the stress patterns Elena had learned to recognize, finally spoke. "Captain Stone, we were ordered to observe. We were told it was necessary for understanding human military capabilities." "I know," Jack replied simply, "and I want you to know that I understand the position you were placed in. Military personnel follow orders, even when those orders conflict with personal ethics." Elena watched in amazement as the dynamic in the room shifted. What could have been an accusation had become an acknowledgement of shared experience. Jack wasn't weaponizing his trauma. He was using it to build bridges. "The territorial dispute around Kepler Station," Jack continued, "is really about fear. Fear that humans will expand aggressively into Corvan space. Fear that your traditional governance structures won't survive contact with human military doctrine. Fear that integration means absorption rather than cooperation." Minister Thack's head tilted in the Corvan gesture of consideration. "Your assessment is not inaccurate, Captain." "Then let's address those fears directly," Elena said, seizing the moment. "The Galactic Council's integration protocols specifically protect traditional governance structures. Human expansion is regulated by the same treaties that govern all member species, and cooperation requires respect for cultural differences, not elimination of them." Dr. Webb stepped forward with his medical scanner. "Minister, if I may, the human civilians aboard Kepler Station require medical assistance. Would the Corvan Empire be willing to provide aid while our governments negotiate territorial boundaries?" It was a brilliant move, Elena realized, offering the Corvans an opportunity to demonstrate their own values while addressing immediate humanitarian concerns. "Of course," Minister Thack said immediately. "Corvan medical protocols extend to all sentient beings in distress." Over the next several hours, Elena watched something remarkable unfold. As human and Corvan medical teams worked together to treat civilian casualties from the border skirmish, the political negotiations took on a completely different character. Instead of adversaries protecting territory, they became partners solving shared problems. The mining rights to the asteroid field could be jointly administered, suggested the Corvan delegate who had observed Jack's interrogation. Corvan expertise in mineral extraction, human expertise in deep space logistics. With profits shared according to the established galactic commerce protocols, Elena added, making sure both species' economic interests were protected. Jack listened to the negotiations with the same tactical awareness he brought to ship operations, occasionally offering insights that bridged cultural gaps. Elena noticed that he never mentioned his own experiences again, but his presence, his willingness to work with people who had witnessed his suffering, spoke more powerfully than any diplomatic speech could have. As the formal agreements took shape, Minister Thack approached Jack privately. "Captain Stone," he said quietly, "I must ask, how do you find it possible to work with us, after what you endured?" Jack considered the question seriously. "Minister, the Viridian experiments were designed to break human psychological bonds. They failed because they misunderstood something fundamental about my species. We don't heal by holding on to pain. We heal by transforming it into something useful." "And what have you transformed your pain into?" "Understanding," Jack replied. "Understanding that every species makes choices based on fear or hope. The Corvans who observed my interrogation were afraid of what humans might become. I choose to hope that we can become something better together than we ever were apart." Elena felt tears prick her eyes as she watched the two beings, former enemies, representatives of species that had inflicted and suffered terrible wounds, find common ground in their shared commitment to something larger than their individual pain. The final territorial agreement was signed aboard the Galactic Unity 3 days later. As the Corvan delegation prepared to depart, Minister Thack made an unexpected announcement. "The Corvan Empire wishes to formally apologize for our species' complicity in the Viridian Research Collective's crimes against humanity. We propose joint humanitarian protocols to ensure such atrocities never occur again." Jack accepted the apology with the same grace he had shown throughout the negotiations, but Elena saw the slight relaxation in his shoulders, the subtle easing of tension he had carried for months. Later, as they watched the Corvan ships depart through the observation deck viewport, Elena and Jack stood together in comfortable silence. "Oh, you did something remarkable here," Elena said finally. "We did something remarkable," Jack corrected. "Individual heroics don't build lasting peace, Ambassador. That requires partnership." Elena smiled, thinking about how much both of them had changed since that moment on the bridge, when she had torn his uniform in anger. They had both been forced to confront their assumptions, their prejudices, and their fears. The process had been painful, but it had also been transformative. "So what happens now?" she asked. "Now we do it again," Jack replied. "Different species, different conflicts, same basic challenge. Learning to see each other as individuals, rather, than representatives of our worst fears. The Centauri situation next?" "The Centauri situation next," Jack agreed. Elena nodded, feeling ready for whatever challenges lay ahead. She had learned that true diplomacy wasn't about managing conflicts from a safe distance. It was about building understanding through shared vulnerability, honest communication, and the courage to see beyond surface appearances. As the galactic unity turned toward its next assignment, Elena realized that the most important thing she had gained from this experience wasn't diplomatic knowledge or professional advancement. It was the understanding that every being in the galaxy, no matter how different they seemed on the surface, carried invisible scars and hidden strengths, and sometimes the greatest act of diplomacy was simply choosing to see those hidden depths and respond with compassion rather than judgment. The stars ahead looked brighter somehow, full of possibilities for understanding that she had never imagined before. Behind her, she could hear the bridge crew preparing for the next phase of their mission. Humans, Altarians, Centaurians, and others working together towards something none of them could achieve alone. It was, Elena realized, exactly what integration was supposed to look like. This HFY, humanity, fate. Yeah. Story explores themes of prejudice, trauma, healing, and the complex work of building understanding between different cultures and species. It suggests that humanity's greatest strength isn't our capacity for violence, but our ability to transform pain into empathy and to choose cooperation over conflict even with former enemies.